So we know that there were 3 unidentified male DNA profiles found at the King Road house. And we know this because this information was included in a court document that was filed by Ann Taylor, who is Bryan Kohberger's defense attorney. We've talked about these profiles before because a lot of people are saying, well, why haven't they identified the profiles? You know, are they hiding something? What's going on? And I explained in a previous video that if DNA is degraded or if it's commingled with other DNA, it's unusable. They're not able to use it. They're not able to build a profile off of it. And given the high traffic of the King Road house, as well as, you know, everything that was going on inside of it and the different, you know, everything that might have been in the air, in the environment, it's very probable that any DNA found in that house would be unusable because it would either be commingled or completely deteriorated. Now, it's easy to find out the sex or to find out the sex of a certain DNA profile because it's either an X or a Y chromosome. That's very simple. It's very straightforward. That's why they were able to tell if they belonged to men. But other than that, there probably wasn't enough DNA that they could use to build a profile. Now, also in this document, Ann Taylor says that there was a total lack, and I think I'm quoting her there was a total lack of DNA evidence connecting her client, the suspect, with the victims. And we took that to mean that they didn't find any of Kohberger's DNA or any of the victims' DNA anywhere, you know, anywhere, basically. And this thought occurred to me when I was creating one of last week's videos about why didn't they find anything? You know, it did take 6 weeks for them to arrest him. We did hear that he was seen cleaning his car, which means that if there was DNA in that car, it was probably degraded. Now, when it comes to these documents are written to create a certain narrative, right? To build a story, to build a case. Brett Payne wrote the PCA to get an arrest warrant for Bryan Kohberger. Ann Taylor is writing her court documents to paint a picture, and that's a picture of law enforcement framing her client. You know, here are 3 unidentified male profiles. Has law enforcement even looked into them? Right? She's trying to create a certain narrative and make a certain impression. And one thing she does very well is she uses words very well. And in one specific area, she says that the sheath was placed. Now, we know what she's trying to imply here, right? That somebody's trying to frame her client. But place could mean a lot of different things, right? It could mean it was set down. It could mean that it fell and it landed there. It could mean a lot of different things, and it could have been placed by the suspect. It could have been placed by law enforcement. She doesn't say, right? Like she's playing with words there, and she's very clever when she does it. And I'm wondering if there's wordplay going on when she talks about the total lack of DNA evidence connecting the suspect with the victims. Now, one thing that I noticed right away when I read this document and I read this specific section about the lack of DNA or the lack of DNA evidence connecting the suspect with the victims, there was no mention of any of his DNA being found on the victims. She said it wasn't found in the home office, you know, car, but she didn't mention if there was any DNA found on the bodies of the victims. Additionally, now we know that it took them, 6 weeks to arrest him? We know that DNA can degrade very quickly, like as early as 2 weeks, depending on what elements and agents it's exposed to. We also know that he was seen cleaning that car. So is it possible that there wasn't there wasn't a total lack of DNA, but a total lack of usable DNA? Because isn't it possible that there was DNA found in his house, in his car, etc., but because of the time lapse, because of different environmental factors, because he was seen cleaning it, because of his OCD and maybe how much he cleaned in general, is it possible that there was DNA found, it just wasn't usable, and therefore they couldn't build a profile, and therefore they couldn't establish a connection? That's just one thing to consider, and it hit me when I was recording one of my videos last week. You know, we all expressed amazement when it came out that they couldn't find any DNA anywhere, and people seem to think that meant, well, case closed, he didn't do it. And I just didn't know if maybe they just hadn't found the DNA yet, or if this was in fact definitive and there was none, because it really didn't make sense to me. So I just went back to the document to get the exact quote. And the exact quote is, "There is no explanation for the total lack of DNA evidence from the victims in Mr. Koberger's car, home, office, or apartment." Interesting. At no time does Ann Taylor mention in this document any DNA evidence found on the victims' bodies. Now, we know that at least 2 of them had defensive wounds, which means there was probably some contact of some kind. And we heard Xana's father say that she was a fighter. Now, I can kind of see how there wouldn't be any DNA in the car or the home or the office, because time had elapsed, environmental factors, it could have degraded, it could have been commingled, etc. But I was always very surprised when I considered that there was no evidence found on the bodies. And I think it's interesting that at no time is it specified. That's never brought up at all, anywhere, in any document that we've seen so far. Now, remember the picture I showed you of that young boy killing his mother last week? I'll show it here again. Imagine a 6-foot-tall adult and 2 women in a smaller bed. Maybe not a full or a queen, but a smaller one. There's no way he could have just stood there and attacked Kaylee if she was against the wall, like it's been said. He would have had to lean over Maddie, thereby increasing the chance that he was going to leave some form of DNA somewhere, right? You know, he would probably have had to lean on the bed. There's no way he could have just attacked Kaylee standing up. There's no way. So he must have leaned on the bed somehow, or, as I originally thought, came up the middle. But either way, he came in very close proximity of both of them. So I find it very hard to believe that there was no DNA transfer between him and any of the victims, but specifically Kaylee and Maddie. And I think it's highly suspect, or at least very interesting, that we haven't heard about any DNA evidence found on the victims' bodies. So as always, I'm going to leave you with a question. Do you think there's more DNA evidence, specifically when it comes to the car or the home or the office? Do you think that they're just playing with words? Do you think there is no DNA? And are you like me and find it hard to believe that no DNA would be transferred to the victims' bodies? Let me know. Leave it in the comments.